This is Liz Humphrey, and welcome to my video about spiritual learning, a final project presentation for Ball State University course EDAC 634, The Adult as a Learner. Published works from Dr. Elizabeth Tisdale provided most of the information for this project. Her background and work in religious education became a foundation for her curiosity about the role of spirituality in education. Before earning her doctorate, Tisdale worked as a minister for the Catholic Church on 2 college campuses and performed therapeutic massage once a week on campus as well. Tisdale reflected on both of her occupations at the time in her 2005 book, Exploring Spirituality and Culture in Adult and Higher Education, and stated that her training, quote, on how to work with energy and be present in particular ways, end quote, allowed her to perform work, quote, related to spirituality and healing of communities on the one hand and individuals on the other, end quote. Tisdale's appreciation for her religious roots and conflict with the religion's relationship with women's issues are reflected in her list of research interests. The catalyst for her interest in the role of spirituality and culture in education came when she was seeking a way to teach about cultural differences in the classroom without creating controversy. Tisdale stated in her 2005 book that teaching, quote, for personal and social change also requires a way of engaging people's hearts and spirits, end quote. This led to her research into spirituality and developing the 7 assumptions for spiritual learning. Through her research, Dr. Tisdale has concluded that the term spirituality is difficult to define. There are many definitions, and at the same time, all of these do not provide a complete picture for the term. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. Tisdale is from her 2008 publication called Spirituality and Adult Learning. In it, she stated, quote, but if spirituality is about wholeness, and because the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, then spirituality itself is always greater than that which can be described in language, end quote. So to provide a more holistic view of spirituality in the context of education, Dr. Tisdale started her 7 assumptions with what spirituality is not. In this assumption, she defines and distinguishes spirituality separate from any religious institution, though she also recognizes that spirituality and religion may be interrelated for some people. The distinction is that religion is an institution for a community of people with a defined creed and code of behavior. Spirituality, on the other hand, takes place on the individual level through their own experiences. After learning what spirituality is not, what does it mean to you? Feel free to pause this video and write some thoughts down about your interpretation of the term spirituality. Chances are that you will find some common themes in the slides ahead. Presented here are Dr. Tisdale's remaining 6 assumptions that help to define spirituality in terms of adult education. Spirituality is about being connected to others, and as Laura Jones stated in her article, What Does Spirituality in Education Mean? Spiritual meaning is, quote, our most authentic relationships to self, others, the universe, and the transcendent, end quote. Jones also stated that, quote, spirituality in education refers to a transcendence and compassion in the classroom that acknowledges the interconnectedness of students, the teacher, and the subject. Every individual's meaning for this will be different. Thus, the next assumption that meaning-making is an important component of spirituality. Through Dr. Tisdale's research, the 6th assumption on symbolic processes speaks to her efforts in teaching about cultural differences as a sense of identity. In Tisdale and Tolliver's journal article, The Role of Spirituality in Culturally Relevant and Transformative Education, the authors stated, quote, nearly all human knowledge and experience, including spiritual experience, will be shared and given expression through culture, in language, in music, in art, or in symbol making. Indeed, people construct knowledge and make meaning in powerful and unconscious ways through symbol, music, art, metaphor, and ritual." End quote. All of these assumptions provide a more complete set of characteristics of spiritual learning. It can be said that spiritual learning is a form of transformational learning. This process is very much like Jarvis's learning process, which describes an event or experience that happens in a moment of time for the learner. The experience itself is not the learning moment. However, over the course of time, the catalysts such as emotion, thoughts and reflection, and action, learning takes place through the making of meaning from the experience. In the process of finding meaning, a person's previous assumptions may change, which causes a transformation into a person with altered assumptions, or a quote-unquote new person. This cycle is iterative but also non-linear. As Tisdale relates, quote, "Mary Catherine Bateson calls spiraling back experiences of this kind, where people reflect back on old experiences and discover something new, spiral learning. What may have been peripheral to these earlier learning experiences can become important meaning-making opportunity at a later date, through the process of spiral learning, whether spiritual or not." End quote. Also, quote, "Just as in any experience that leads to learning, a spiritual experience takes place at a particular moment in time, but making sense of it or learning from the experience happens over time." End quote. So how can spiritual learning be applied to adult education? The work of Tisdale, along with others like Jane Vella, Marian D'Souza, Yi-Ling Ng, and Gary Piercy, show common components and current trends of instructional methods that can be used to foster spiritual development in students. Tisdale stresses, though, that, quote, "Attending to spirituality in learning doesn't mean that one need necessarily to discuss it directly in classes or learning activities." End quote. Although, quote, "There also may be times when it is perfectly appropriate to directly include spirituality as part of the course content if it's relevant to one's educational purpose." End quote. Some of the activities used in studies that were positively correlated to spiritual development are included here. It was stressed in these studies that the teacher become more of a guide in developing students to be the subject of their own learning, and to foster positive experiences that cultivate a sense of connectedness. After learning about spirituality in education, how will you use these concepts in your classrooms? Fostering spiritual development exists in efforts to become more culturally relevant and honoring individual student backgrounds and experiences. Using student experiences to provide opportunities for meaning making can be implemented in activities where students can express themselves in art, music, symbols, and metaphors. Depending on the content of your course, spirituality can be explicitly discussed or implicitly embedded into content-related activities. The possibilities are endless.